and has us by the genitalia. That's why I began by saying, and I'm glad I got it in early because I'll be able to return to it. It is absolutely crucial that we make India our crucial ally in the region and not Pakistan. This will involve us in a negotiation that we have criminally and shamefully neglected for a long time, which is to interest ourselves in the possibility of an autonomy solution for Kashmir, which is India's great shortcoming politically, but is also, alas, part of its guarantee as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state. But there's a real future in building a relationship with India. There's no future at all in building a relationship with the Pakistani ISI and their clients. That's doomed to start with.
Afghanistan has gone so badly that Pakistan has actually been the good news story for the administration. The army has taken on its own homegrown Taliban in Swat and in South Waziristan, et cetera, et cetera. We have a new aid package, which seems to show the Pakistanis are bona fides. It's focused on long-term development, et cetera. Two problems. One, the floods of the Indus River have displaced 20 million people. I mean, for some reason, this is not caught on as a Haiti-like. Haiti caught on much more than this, maybe because it's so far away. But it's a disaster of just unimaginable proportions, and it's going to change the politics, economics of that country for years and years. And second, as Dex's reporting showed, they may have decided their own Taliban were a threat, but they remain committed to the Afghan Taliban, to the point where, in a Filkins piece, turns out a whole string of arrests of high-level Taliban by the Pakistanis were not part of the war on terror or the war on the Taliban. They were Pakistan telling its proxy, the Afghan Taliban, you don't negotiate with Karzai without us. We're going to lock you up for a little while to teach you who's boss here. We're running you, not the other way around. So that is the Pakistan's truly warped idea of its own strategic interests is the heart of the problem in the region, and to change that is the business of decades of effort. And
in the short time that we have left, I wanted to step back for a minute on this theme of things that Obama may believe but doesn't want to publicly say for domestic political reasons, Christopher. And I think one of the things that's just shadowing the whole foreign policy debate a great deal in the domestic political debate is the question of whether the president really believes that American power is in decline. And that one of the reasons we may have to live with things that we don't like is that we don't get to dictate things in the way that we once thought we could. And I wonder if you think that's true of the people making Obama's foreign policy, that they are essentially trying to deal with a world in which they think that American power is never going to go back to where it was, even say in the 1990s, or where we thought it was, and whether in fact you think that's an accurate depiction of the reality we live in.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I think it's subconsciously at least true of a lot of his advisors and of himself. I'm not sure it's true of his Secretary of State. And I'm not sure that he's fully thought it out, as a lot of people haven't, who wished for a less imperial America, but didn't think of the implications of there being another superpower that was stronger than it. That's not seeming very likely at the end of the Cold War period. Now, I think that thought has, or ought to have by now, a bit evolved when one considers the rise of a very self-confident and aggressive Russia, for example. Putin managing to fuse both the tactics of the KGB and the relationship with the Russian Orthodox Church that the Tsars had before Stalin into a nasty, xenophobic, clerical, chauvinist regime, militarized and police-run, and increasingly aggressive on its borders, very close to Western Europe. Or to a China, which, for example, you mentioned sanctions several times this evening, rightly in the case of Iran. But every time anyone tries to do anything, and it's usually on the initiative of the United States, about Burma,
Zimbabwe,
Darfur, Zimbabwe, North Korea, any of these things, the Chinese are always there at the UN to block it. Not always, but usually with Russian help. So a good long look at what a world where another superpower would be calling the shots would look like, I think might be very salutary. And I think there's a slight tendency at the moment to look away from that.
Just ask the question to you. Do you think that the people making Obama foreign policy believe that they're having to manage American decline?
I think probably they do. I don't know it for sure. They're not going to say it publicly or to me. I think you're right that Hillary Clinton, she gave a speech at the Council on Foreign Relations the other day that suggested that we're living in 1947. All we need to do is make a whole new architecture of national security and we will once again lead the world. And I'd like to believe it's true for the same reasons that Christopher just said. But actually, the national security strategy document that they released a few months ago, the key to it was essentially we cannot lead abroad if our economy and our society are in decline. Our economy and our society are unquestionably in decline. And history shows that a world power does not maintain its level of power abroad when its people are not graduating from college, and when its high-speed rail would be laughable in just about any other country, and et cetera, and when its political opposition, and I get back to what I alluded to at the start, when its political opposition is so irresponsible that even as common sense a treaty as the nuclear reduction treaty with Russia could be filibustered for the sake of blocking an Obama initiative, and only for that reason. There are dysfunctions at home that make whatever our position on India, Iran, et cetera, almost tangential. And I think Obama's right to realize that the eclipse of our own politics and economics is a threat to our leadership in the world. And unfortunately, he's governing at a time of a kind of political irrationality that doesn't see the long term in that way. And I think he's unfortunate in the period in which he came to power. I think he might have been a better president at another time, but he doesn't speak the language that people seem to want to hear these days.
Well, this hasn't been a cheery discussion, but it's been a very honest one, and I think for that I feel grateful, and I hope you feel grateful. Thank you very, very much for coming.
And now for a competition of sorts between two brothers. The journalist, Christopher Hitchens, is one of the world's most famous atheists. His brother, Peter, insists a civilized world must believe in God. The brothers have publicly argued over faith for years, but now Christopher Hitchens has been diagnosed with cancer. NPR's Barbara Bradley Haggerty reports.
Christopher Hitchens wears a white straw hat. His head, completely bald from chemotherapy treatments, gets cold. He's tired, he's thin, he's off his food. But he's still pugnacious when asked if having cancer has changed his view of religion or God.
If anything, my contempt for the false consolation of religion has increased since I became aware that I probably don't have very long to live.
Since Hitchens' cancer diagnosis in June, he's received thousands of letters and emails, some from believers asserting he's getting what he deserves, more from people saying they're praying for his recovery. Hitchens says he's been overwhelmed by the outpouring, but he's annoyed that some writers hope he'll have a last-minute conversion to Christianity.
Under no persuasion could I be made to believe that a human sacrifice several thousand years ago vicariously redeems me from sin. Nothing could persuade me that that was true or moral. It's white noise to me.
His brother, Peter, is equally blunt.
There is actually no absolute right and wrong if there is no God.
The two spoke yesterday at an event hosted by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life. Now, Peter once held his older brother's views. He burned his Bible when he was a teenager in boarding school, but by his late 20s, he felt drawn back to his Anglican faith. He says his work as a journalist in Somalia and the former Soviet Union persuaded him that civilization without religious morality devolves into brutality. Moral behavior, he says, requires more than higher reasoning. It requires God.
It seems to me to be very, very hard to come up with an atheistic explanation of conscience any more than you could have a compass without a magnetic north. And if the magnetic north kept shifting, then it would be very difficult to steer your boat or your plane across the Atlantic.
Christopher Hitchens dismisses that argument, pointing out that much of the world's evil is committed in the name of religion.
If I was to say to someone, now can you name me please a hideous moral act undertaken or an immoral remark made by someone because of their faith, you've already thought of one. Now you've thought of another one. And you'll keep on thinking of them.
But Peter says arguments like that overlook all the good religion has done. Now, for years, the Hitchens brothers have fought over God with barely concealed disdain. But yesterday, the tone was different. Peter Hitchens says he doesn't see the point of getting angry anymore.
He has been my opponent for most of my life. And I certainly have in the past been angry with him. But I would say that is over.
For his part, Christopher Hitchens praised his brother's work and laughed at his jokes. As for facing death, he suspects that you have the same emotions whether you believe in God or not.
People say, cancer picked the wrong foe in you, you can beat this if anyone can, lots of that kind of thing. And it actually does have the effect of slightly giving me the blues, because I don't want to let people down. The psychological makeup of this is roughly the same whether you assume a supernatural dimension or not.
But Christopher Hitchens' bout with cancer is remarkable in one respect. He's chosen to confront the biggest questions about God, life, and death in the most public of ways. Barbara Bradley Haggerty, NPR News.